Okay, welcome to the WPIAL Blitz Show podcast year in review. I can't believe those words just came out of my mouth, but they did anyway. My name's Bruce Badgley. As always, my good friend Ian McMeans. Ian, we've got a very special guest with us this evening.
We do. We are honored to once again have Dan Zangrilli from KDKA Radio. Dan broadcast all six state championship games, as well as had a WPIAL game of the week every week. So I'm sure this Friday night he'll have a nice relaxing time after being tied up, all season doing high school football. But Dan, you guys did a great job, and thanks for everything you and KDKA Radio did to promote high school football throughout the region and the state. So how were the state championships? What was your experience?
It was obviously great to be out there, and it was a great story that from the western part of the state that, I think what for the first time ever, you had, I think, six schools out there. There have been five WPIAL schools in the past, I think, but I think Westinghouse at this point is almost like an adopted WPIAL school. To go six for six, it was a really unique thing because we huddled up and like, well, how do we do this? And because it's hard, frankly, in today's day and age, and it's a great undertaking and a great expense. And I mean, there are a lot of hidden costs in doing this sort of thing. And we came to the conclusion, said, well, you know what, we got to do it. This is an unprecedented thing, so it calls for some unprecedented type of coverage and commitment. And we went all in on it. And the games were, I think, okay. At the end of the day, five of the six were essentially blowouts, and of course, the Westinghouse game, the 2A game, was the best of them all. But yeah, I was glad that we were able to hopefully fill a void, and people were able to engage with us and get all six of those games on. So it was a lot of fun, a lot of work, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of work. We were like two ships passing in the night there that one day.
Yeah, like in a
catatonic
catatonic state. At the end of the day, you do those double headers, you kind of limp out of there at the end of the night because Bruce, you were there, and what role were you doing there? Were you on the field?
Yeah,
You probably had it.
I was on the
easier.
field for all six with Eastern PA football, and the one thing that I was most proud of is the fact that I got post-game interviews with all six championship coaches at the end, something that I'd never been able to do, something I was really proud of, and something I'll always remember as well for me. But yeah, and you guys had like sideline reporter, you had like social media. I mean, when you talked about the investment that you guys made, hey, I know how much it cost me to go there. I couldn't even imagine you with all of your staff and that to come up from Pittsburgh there. That was quite an investment. And just kudos to your sponsors that supported that kind of coverage.
No doubt. Probably I don't know what the bill is going to be, but if I had to guess right now, four hotel rooms for 4 nights. There's mileage and travel costs, and to put those games on, there are rights fees involved.
Sure.
For each game that we have to pay. So it's not cheap. Without divulging too much, it's not cheap, and and there's a lot of reasons why a lot of outlets sort of shy away when it does come time to really put up, right? Because you have to. I mean, these aren't easy to do. They're 3.5 hours away. You've got a lot of fees involved, and the whole 9 yards. And a lot of people decide, hey, we just can't do it. And it's probably the first time I would think that one radio station has broadcast all six games and posted up there all day in the 35 years of the tournament. I would venture a guess that we're the first. So yeah, kudos. Allegheny Health Network, Sports Medicine, Parmar Stores. They've made big investments. Many others that I'm leaving out. So we're really, really, really fortunate.
Well, as the non-broadcaster on the show, the guy who just was listening to it while I was putting up my Christmas decorations, I appreciated all the broadcasts and listening to the Fort Cherry game while I was at work on Thursday. I was like, oh, this is great. I'm doing work. I can turn on the radio, listen to the championship game. And it was really cool to be able to have them all and just have that resource to be able to tap into at any time. And Dan, you do a great job with it's always anytime I listen to you, like you always know when a big play is coming just by the level of excitement in your voice goes up, and it's awesome to just be on the listening end of it.
Well, thank you. And you're the guy that we were thinking of, right? Somebody that's at work that can't make it on a Thursday afternoon or a Friday afternoon that's coming home around 3 o'clock. That's kind of when people would be maybe in the car or if they can't make it, or the TV situation and cable is so fragmented and cord cutting. We figured that there's and then streaming situation. People don't want to pay for that, and there's all the way that media is. We just figured let's just double down on it and then give people such as yourself and hopefully others. And I think we got some pretty good response from it. That hey, yeah, let's make this available. So thank you so much. Appreciate that. Appreciate the kind words. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, it's one of the most fun things that I've ever done. I've done some different things in the career, but this is right there at the top of the list of things that I enjoy most.
And speaking of kind of the unprecedented investment, KDKA got to do a WPIAL Game of the Weeks from pretty much week 0 or week 1 all the way through the end of the state championship. So you guys were doing games every week, and I don't think there's ever been kind of a dedicated game of the week on the radio that I can think of. Individual stations have had local games, but not like a sort of dedicated way that this was put together. So that was pretty cool. You guys got to see some really cool things this year. I mean, Aliquippa's stadium opening and all the other games you broadcast. So do you have any lasting memories from any games that you broadcast this year?
We actually started by going to Pickerington North. So we did an overnight trip for week 0 because the defending state champions, that's kind of one of those things that we'll probably do, is make kind of like Sunday Night Football would do. The defending state champion opens on KDKA, and it just so happened that they're playing near Columbus, Ohio, against an Ohio power. So we packed our bags and then we went out there and we got some good response on that. So that was an interesting thing to just go to the eastern part of Ohio to see what that is all about, and that's obviously some next level stuff. Great campus, great facility. So that was a unique experience. But yeah, seeing how everybody reacted to the pit, Heinz Field, Aliquippa, that was special. The Central Catholic North Allegheny regular season game, even though it was 50-22, but the lead up to that was as big of I think hype for a regular season game that I can remember in 20 years. It was probably the biggest crowd I've ever seen for a high school football game. Outside of maybe some of those early back in the George Novak heydays when the Wolverina would really get packed. We're talking the Steve Breston era, 2001, 2, 3. I mean, they would routinely get 10,000 people in there, but there were every bit of 10,000 people, I think, at Newman Stadium for Central and North Allegheny, and they had the youth nights, and it was just their production is off the charts. So they're all memorable. We did all 6 WPIAL championship games. The 2 at Norwin, and then we did all day cover. We got on the air for Acrisure Stadium at 10 a.m. We didn't leave the air until close to 11 o'clock. That's a 13-hour live broadcast where we didn't leave the air. In between
on radio, I can't even imagine that. Yeah. I mean, because obviously you do so much more on a radio broadcast that at least when I'm doing live streams, there's something on there moving or whatever like that. You have to create so much on a radio broadcast. I can't even imagine being on a radio broadcast for that long.
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of people. Certainly, Paul Alexander was able to jump in for a game. I did 3 of them, but my broadcast partner, Johnny Lee, he sat down basically at 10:30. I mean, I think he went to the bathroom a couple of times, but he did 4 games as the analyst. It's a little different as the analyst, mind you, but in between games, there's that half-hour period. We had halftime. I mean, we had 10, 12 people there. We had 4 different multimedia shooters. We had between the social media, the hosts, 2 different rotating sideline reporters,
it's a big deal.
Yeah. Well, our boss, we're the flagship station at Odyssey Pittsburgh, right? It's a 5-station cluster that also owns 93.7 The Fan. And we're fortunate that we have a deep and talented staff on payroll that could jump in and do these things. But our boss, Michael Spacciapoli, we call him Spac. When we started this, we had breakfast at Bob's Diner in Carnegie. I was still at WBU at the time doing a lot of their games. And he says, I want to do a game of the week and I want to do it big. And I want to make high school football sound like a Power 5 broadcast because it's so big here in Western Pennsylvania and it's deserving of that. And there's a void. And there's been a lot of outlets that have done incredible work and have taken coverage to certain heights. And quite frankly, we stand on their shoulders. So like I kind of acknowledge the past and respect it. I was part of it. And that's part of my upbringing. But he wanted to make this Power 5 worthy. I mean, you should see the rig and the equipment. It's better than, I mean, I worked 6 years at the Power 5 level. I'm using better gear and equipment, more state-of-the-art sophistication. I mean, our sideline reporter kit is like it's better than West Virginia University, and that's like a 40-station network. It's literally anything like you would hear or see or use for like a Westwood One national broadcast. Better in some respects. So we've made every investment imaginable, from the promotion, the activation at game days. We set up a pregame show tent like college game days. We set up these massive signs around the field. We have an entire crew there every Friday night. And we have a pregame show that's an hour long. That's a 2-man show. We do a postgame show that's up until 11 o'clock. That's a 2-man show. Like it's Friday nights.
Wow.
We're treating it like we do at the University of Pittsburgh. And how we put their broadcasts on. It's the same SKU, same blueprint, same commitment.
Wow, fantastic.
Awesome.
Yeah, that is fantastic.
So if I can just put a bug in your ear.
Sure. Yeah. Well, yeah. Oh, by the way, hold on a second. Bruce, Ian filled in one night.
Yeah, he did. He talked about that. He talked about he came on the show and his chest was out of, hey, I was on KDKA.
I love
post game, and he should be, man. I mean, that's big time.
So what happened is, and it's just the stars just happened to align. I think it was week 8, which is just, I think, one of the funnest, craziest weeks of all. More so than week 9 in some respects, because that's like, people are getting eliminated. The points are such a factor, and there's so many different scenarios. And this guy over here, he's got this thing down like to a sign. He's got it on a spreadsheet. I mean, he's got an algebraic equation. And I'm like, this is fascinating, because in this particular year, maybe more so than others, there's just like so many scenarios that were out there. Well, then Carlos Zofko, WPIAL insider, who we brought on board, who's been great. He worked in the recruiting offices for Pat Narduzzi, so he knows every coach, and he has seen film on every player, and his Rolodex is absolutely fantastic in how, he's got basically a book on every guy. So he brought a really unique perspective. Well, he's out to California for a wedding. And then I'm watching Ian's stuff, and this came together pretty quickly. And it might have been the day of, might have been that Friday morning. I said, well, you know what? I think we don't know what we're going to do for Friday night. Who's going to work with Paul? I said, what are you doing? I said, just knock on the door. I'll tell the producer to let you in, and then just go sit down. And Paul Alexander was like blown away. He's like, dude, where'd you find this guy? This guy's unbelievable. Like, this was the coolest thing in the world. He's like, we have to have him back. Like, so Ian did a great job, and I was listening on the way home. He knocked it out of the park. So kudos to Ian on that maiden voyage. That was really cool, and he bailed us out.
Thank you. And I was super honored to even be asked. Like, it was the most fun I had all year, and I'd always wanted to kind of be a part in any way that I could of like a post-game wrap-up show. I always thought that was one thing that was kind of missing was, like I said, individual radio stations out of Greensburg or Uniontown or wherever might do a local game, but there was never a region-wide wrap-up show that you could listen to on the way home from a game in your car. And I was always like, this would be so cool to have. And then when you guys did it this year, I was listening every week and helped you guys find some scores and things like that.
Yeah.
I felt like kind of what I was bringing to the table was like, I have, like you said, spreadsheets and all that stuff. I figure out all the tiebreakers. I also have I'm like an amateur historian. So I have all this like historical knowledge of, this is the 23rd straight year that this team's made the playoffs and things like that. And then, like you said, with Carlo, he's got the insider knowledge of all the players and all that. And I feel like everyone's skill sets that contributed to the show really complemented each other and worked well together. And I was honored just to be able to have a small part in it, and it was super fun. And if you ever need me again, just let me know. I'd
Yeah,
love to
man.
do it.
No, we know where to find you. We know
You
where to
do,
find
you do. Yeah, right over the hill from the studio, literally.
you. Yeah.
But if I can jump back to something you said, so you mentioned about having the defending state champions kick off the season on KDKA, and Bell Vernon and Aliquippa are both defending state champs and are the only two teams in the top 4 classifications that did not play a week 0 game last year. So you guys could maybe pull some strings in the offseason and see if you could set up like a Bell Vernon Aliquippa week 0 game. That would be really cool. And actually, Bell Vernon's moving up to 4A this year, so it would actually be a in classification game for the two of them.
So let me let you in on a little secret. The rumor was that game was supposed to happen and open at the pit.
Oh,
this past year, but for whatever reason, it didn't happen.
Oh,
so you talk about woulda, coulda, shoulda been.
Mhm.
That was supposed to be, as we understand it, the game. So Ian, you're on the right track. I don't know if it'll gain traction, but here's another thing I might let you in on. There might be 2 new head coaches for those programs
wow.
coming up for 2024 too. So there's probably going to be some change there if everything that what I'm hearing actually comes to fruition. But I would agree that would be one heck of a way to open a season.
Wow. Pretty incredible stuff. And speaking to that point, Dan, obviously, you're privy to obviously a lot of inside information that and we all are, and that how do you keep that kind of under your hat the best that you can? I mean, it's really difficult when you're when you do get information like that. And so yeah,
Well,
how do you do that?
I mean, I wouldn't go as far as saying, even though I probably revealed some stuff there just a moment ago. I mean, I don't think I have any more or less of an advantage than anybody else. I mean, these coaches are pretty accessible. You just shoot them a text and say, "Hey, can we talk?" I mean, I've really never met a high school coach that has been like, "No, don't have any time for you. Won't." I mean, all the coaches will talk to you, and they'll talk to you, on and off the record. So it's really, Bruce, like anything else at any other level.
Sure.
There's on the record, there's off the record. There's things that you source on your own if you need to report on something. And what I'm gathering, I haven't heard from those 2 particular coaches, nor have I asked them, frankly, just out of respect for the situation. What's going down there. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I hold any trade secrets or it's like anything else. If things are on the record, you go with them. If things are not, then they're not. So much like any other beat reporter for the Pirates, the Steelers, the Penguins, I think you just take the same approach to answer your question.
Yeah. Ian, you got a final question here for Dan? And I tell you, it's been pretty incredible time here, speaking with you, my friend. But yeah, Ian, go ahead. I could probably go on for about another hour, but I think we'll let you let Dan get back to his life.
Yeah, now that he can have one again, now that the season's over.
Right.
So just as a final parting thought, you've kind of given shout outs to a lot of other members of your crew, your sponsors. Anyone else you want to give a shout out to that was involved in the KDKA broadcast this year? I know you have a lot of people.
Yeah.
So just want to give another opportunity in case you've.
No, of course. I mean, like our Friday night crew consists of, the guy that I've worked with for 20 years, who actually lives right down the street from me. He's my neighbor. He got me my house, which is funny, but Johnny Lee means the world to me. Personally, I wouldn't want to, nor would I do it with anybody else. Obviously, we have a great crew. Ben Tenuta is off the charts. With the multimedia work, Cale Berger works his tail off on the social media side of things. Shelby Cassesi, one of the news anchors at KDKA, jumped on board to our Our team as the sideline reporter did a fantastic job. We have a big promotions crew, some people behind the scenes that are really doing a lot of hard work on game days. Um, Greg Finley is really important to what we do. I'd be remiss if I didn't shout him out. He's on the other side of the glass, and Ian knows who I'm talking about. He helps Greg out in sourcing the scores, but as that's going on, Greg is spinning so many plays. He's running the broadcast, and then he's our halftime studio host, and then he runs the post game show. He's an ace. He's unbelievable. I could throw anything at him, and he makes everything at home sound copacetic and run flawlessly. Like we could not do what we do on so many different fronts without him. He's so good. I can't say enough about him.
Greg
And
would
then
like text me during the broadcast, like, "Did you see the score of this game?" And I'm like, "How do you have time to text me when you're
yeah,
running a broadcast and
no
looking up
idea.
scores and doing like?" He's incredible. I agree.
The
Yeah,
stuff
he's
that I mean,
awesome.
he's in my ear feeding me stuff and like telling me, doing the same thing to me, like during a break. And high school football is so wild in that it's not structured like a college or like a Power 5 deal. Like, one kid's on his back, he's hurt, and then he pops up. A new life has been breathed into him, and then we got to come back. We got to take 30. We got to take 2 minutes. We got to cut it short. I mean, I screw up a call. Hey, Greg, can you edit that so I don't sound like a fool? It makes it sound like it never occurred. It's like he can go in back in time, and it fit like, and he's so important to like Tenuta's multimedia stuff. So he turns highlights around so quickly. Like we're playing back highlights, like on a post game show, and I can, then you know then Nolan DeLucia, hooked up 57 yards to such and such receiver. Boom, I call for it, and he's got the highlight. Like there's no script, there's no plan, there's nothing. It's the immediacy of live radio is just that. It's like off the cuff, and I mean he polishes the thing up like you wouldn't believe. Can't say enough good. I mean he means a lot to us.
Wow, that's just fantastic, Dan. And like I said, for a guy, I don't do anything close to what, quite honestly, you do there, sir. But the value of the people that you work with is immeasurable.
Mm.
In any form of broadcast that you're dealing at, really at any level. And I can understand why you have such high regard and such fond and such good feelings about your crew there. So Dan, I'll tell you what, it was a pleasure actually seeing you in person for the first time. Those few seconds we had going up and
Yeah,
down the stairs there.
yeah, it was it. But I think we were pushing the cart full of equipment on the way out the door, and yeah, I mean we're lucky because anybody in what we do, and thank you all for saying what you have said, but I mean it starts with leadership. We have that, but anybody can do anything with 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 people and money, frankly. And we're able to do that because we've been given an inordinate amount of resources that nobody, frankly, has ever been given to do this. And if you do that, anybody could pull it off, really. So we're lucky, we're spoiled. We have 50,000 watts behind, like the whole 9 yards. Like
Mhm.
we're very resource rich in that respect, and that just makes us lucky at the end of the day.
Well, listen, Dan. Listen, thanks for giving us the time today. We really appreciate that. And look, you're welcome to take Ian anytime that you want. I mean, I don't think that you guys have a show where you're going to need him on Monday night at 9:15. So, just go right ahead, man. I mean, I was very happy for him, and to see actually, how great you guys are that do this for a living, and how hard you work. I think is something that is amazing. I always marvel at it when I'm around, professionals that do radio, television, and everything, how hard you people work. And just keep up the great work, my friend. And we'll definitely have you on again next year. Maybe if we have some kind of mid-season show as well.
Let's do it. And thanks for all the love that you've shown us and promoting what we do. It really helps, and a big fan of what you guys do too.
Well, listen, thanks, Dan. All right, you can just go ahead and exit out. Ian and I'll take
All
it
right.
from here. Thanks a lot, my friend.
See you
Thanks,
guys.
Dan.
See
Enjoy
ya.
the off season.
All right. Likewise. Good night.
See ya.
Dan's great.
Incredible.
This is gonna have to be like a yearly thing now. Last year when I reached out to him the first time, I was like, I'll take a shot in the dark. He's a professional broadcaster. I don't know if he'll come on our little show, but why not? And we had a good time with him last year and had him on again this year. And like he said, I got that little opportunity to be on the radio. So that was really cool. That was the highlight of my year. Was
The
getting to
reason
be
you
on the
have
radio.
the reason you got the opportunity, Ian, is just what Dan spoke about, is the fact that that you've carved out a very important aspect of high school football coverage, and that is statistical analysis and everything else, which is part of this program too. That's why people navigate to this show, as well as through a lot of the hard work that you do, and then the hard work that guys like Dan, that people actually do, broadcast for a living. That's hard work, and people love what they do. And I don't, I mean, the amount of respect that I have for all of those people, just like he was talking about. I mean, I can't even imagine. Well, let's just say, I guess I will do a live stream. I think upcoming this Saturday with my buddy Bob Long. We are going to do 6 basketball games. It's a charity event, but oh my God, I can't even imagine. That's going to be rough. That's going to be rough. Now we kind of rotate around between play, just like he said, play by play, color, and then production. So we're not all in the same chair. But it's
Yeah.
hard work. It's hard work. But anyway, what a great man, and what a great job they do.
Yeah, and we're certainly thankful for everyone that interacts with us and all that throughout the year, because I couldn't do what I do without everybody else and everybody's input. I'm, like I said, I'm here listening to games on the radio that Dan is calling, and part of me being able to talk about games is what I hear through what they produce, what they put out on social media, things like that as well. So I'm definitely very grateful for everyone that we get to interact with throughout the year. The coaches, we got to interview the mayor of Aliquippa this year. How cool was that? We
Yeah,
interviewed,
Mayor Walker is chatting on the show, already, and gosh, I got to meet him. Obviously, I think most everybody probably saw the picture. That was
yeah,
the first thing when I got to the stadium. I always like to get there early. I said, "Where's Mayor Walker? Where's Mayor Walker?"
yeah. The Quip people are great, and they always travel in mass and bring a good crowd to every game they go to. So yeah, but let's get started, because we do have things we want to talk about today
Yeah, we
on the
do.
show. Even it is our season wrap up show. So congratulations to the 6 state champions. I think my takeaway from afar, and we'll talk about it more as we go through each classification, but I think my big takeaway was that, with the exception of the 2A game, it seemed like the more athletic team won every game. And obviously, you were there, you saw it in person. But just from what I was able to observe, it seemed like the teams that were stacked with the D1 recruits were the teams that brought home the trophies.
Can't disagree with you at all. And obviously we'll go through the individual ones there, but individual games, but at the 40,000-foot level, you're exactly right with that assessment, that the teams that and had depth of talent. I mean, not just 1 or 2 players, but 6, 8, 10, 12 players. Those are the teams that really shined, as they should in this situation. And just at the 40,000-foot level, Dan talked about the fact that there was one close game, but all of the games, all of the teams that won championships, we should embrace their excellence, not criticize the fact that it wasn't a close game, but just embrace the fact that that is one great football team. And that's my takeaway from the teams that put on pretty stellar performances.
Yeah, and I think too, to go back to our season preview show, we talked about that this year was pretty much about the usual suspects, and a lot of these teams were either defending champions or had been here before. I think all 6 state champions were in the finals last year. 5 of the 6 of them, no, 4 out of the 6 of them won last year, with Aliquippa and Imhotep losing last year but winning this year. So these were teams that had all been here before. But it'll be interesting, and we'll talk about this later in the show, kind of what happens next year, because 3 of these teams had quarterbacks that were seniors that were 3-year starters. Steel High's quarterback was a 4-year starter. So I guess, 4 out of the 6 of them had kids that have been starting since they were freshmen or sophomores. Bell Vernon's moving up to 4A next year. So there's a lot of stuff coming in the future. But for this year, it was, all about the teams getting back there and finishing the job. And, these players for these schools all leaving tremendous legacies with their programs.
Yep, absolutely.
All right, so let's talk 6A to start, and we'll work our way through the classifications. North Allegheny defeating Central Catholic in a heck of a WPIAL championship game to win their 6th WPIAL title, going back-to-back after losing to Central earlier in the year, then making it all the way to the state championship before falling to St. Joe's Prep. And they put up a good fight, but the score was a little closer than the game itself was. We said on our preview show last week that NA was going to have to come out and be able to run the ball early to be able to hang with St. Joe's Prep. And St. Joe's defense did a really good job of shutting down NA's rushing game in the first half, and by halftime had a pretty insurmountable lead.
Yeah, they did. And, that was the one thing that I was interested to see is whether, North Allegheny was going to try a few wrinkles, that they would, maybe find something at the bottom of the playbook, onside kick. I mean, something other than to try not to go mano-a-mano with St. Joe Prep. That, was the thing that I was going to look at, and they went mano-a-mano, and that's just not a very good solution to the problem, or it didn't turn out to be anyway. And yeah, it was very, very vanilla. There wasn't a lot of even counter plays. It didn't seem like there was a lot of imagination into the offensive game plan. So to try and use St. Joe's Prep speed against them, with some misdirection plays and get them going the wrong direction and that. So, but
just out of curiosity, and because I wasn't there in person watching the game, how much of that do you think was like the way St. Joe's Prep shut down NA's offense in the first half, though? Because it really, like, NA was struggling to get first downs. Like it seemed like a struggle to, like, even put a drive together for them sometimes. That, I know watching the Steelers have the same problem, that they get slowed down so much in the first half and go 3 and out and 3 and out and 3 and out, and all of a sudden, like, you feel like your offense has no rhythm and you can't even dip into the playbook because you can't even, like, you're trying to just get a first down. You're trying to do the simple things first before you do the complicated things.
Well, I think that the imagination is what was needed to win the game, and I really didn't see that. I think it was more a situation of that they were trying not to lose rather than to win. To maybe throw it on first down. Okay, a little play action on first down would have been okay by me. I didn't see any of that. So not and to try and break tendencies too. I mean, St. Joe Prep is a very well-coached team. All these teams are well-coached teams. Yeah. And some of the things that you got to break through is to break your tendencies. You got 15 weeks of film out there. So, trying to break some tendencies, but with obviously not trying to go away from, what you do best, but maybe just do it a little bit differently. So that's my take.
That makes sense to me. So looking at the WPIAL season in itself, our 6A player of the year is Logan Kushner, the quarterback from North Allegheny. I had a bit of a hard time trying to decide on this one. I was between Logan Kushner and Peyton Wayner, the quarterback from Central Catholic, who just put up astounding numbers this year. But at the end of the day, Central won the regular season game. North Allegheny won the playoff game, the rematch, and it was Logan Kushner's big play in the championship game. We interviewed head coach Art Walker last week, and he talked about that play. When Kushner just sliced through Central's defense and took it, 60 some odd yards for a touchdown that put North Allegheny up by 10 and pretty much put the game away at that point. And Central would score late but wouldn't recover the onside kick. But, Kushner gets my nod for the WPIAL Player of the Year. And on all these ones, I was kind of limited by space on how many honorable mentions I could choose. There was tons of outstanding players this year. I tried to pick who I thought were kind of the best of the best, but I'm sure there's always good players that I leave off. So don't be offended if I didn't put your name on the slide. But there were lots of good players out there this year, in every classification. And the two edge rushers for North Allegheny, even in the state championship game between Sellers and Buggy, and what they were able to do, to at least get into the backfield and disrupt St. Joe's Prep a little bit, I thought was impressive. And what they did through the whole playoff run was just dominant, what Sellers and Buggy did.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't argue with the results that North Allegheny had over a season, a great season, a memorable season. All these teams that went this far. I mean, a memorable season for the WPIAL, just like Dan touched on. I mean, has a WPIAL team like made it in all 6 classifications, ever? And obviously with the Westinghouse thing there in 2A, I consider them to be a WPIAL team. I think it was an amazing accomplishment to have one district, or a particular geographic area like that that's so dominant that they have a representative in all 6 championship games. I think that's something that's gonna really go down in the record books.
Yeah, and to my knowledge, I don't think the WPIAL ever had. I know Western Pennsylvania has never had 6 in the 8 years of the 6 classification era. I'll have to go back and look and see if we ever had 4 in the 4 classification era. I don't think we did. I think there was always like 1 year where someone didn't make it. If there was, it might have been like 2013, but I'll have to go back and look and see.
Yeah, I'm sure if somebody will find it, it'll be you.
This will not surprise you at all, Bruce. But I have a spreadsheet that has the result of every state playoff game that's ever happened.
I'm sure
1988 to present. So
I'm sure you do.
I'll just look through it. All right. So our big storylines this year: North Allegheny going back to back. The other new head coaches at Central Catholic and Mount Lebanon, with Ryan Lehmeyer at Central Catholic and then Mike Colati at Mount Lebanon. Obviously Ryan Lehmeyer reinvented Central's offense from a run-heavy attack to an open passing game. That was a tremendous storyline that we followed all season. And then statewide, the ones that stood out to me, the upsets in the District 1 semifinals, and then Harrisburg avenging their earlier season loss to Manheim Township. I did put in each slide, for each classification, the final year-end WPIAL Blitz rankings that were the sort of statistical rankings I put together this year. The one thing I'll note on this, and is I'll say slight mathematical flaw that I'm going to have to figure out how to correct for next year, is that because I continued to add all of the playoff results to the rankings, teams were getting rating points for teams that they played as they won more games. So like Central Catholic finishes above North Allegheny in these rankings, even though North Allegheny won the title and went to the state championship game, because as North Allegheny continued to win more games and wound up with 13 wins on the season, that kept adding points to Central's total as well, because Central had beaten North Allegheny earlier in the year. So that was like helping them in that former result. So I'll have to figure that out a little bit. You'll see that as we kind of go through the other classifications as well. But something that I wanted to put the rating numbers on here, because it does kind of show which teams were really close together and which teams had a pretty significant gap between them.
Yeah, no, interesting, but I think the Blitz rankings, boy, that's something that came out of this year that I think it was really fantastic, Ian, and looking forward to how that morphs into something next year too. I really enjoyed that, and just an incredible job putting that together.
Thanks. And overall, I mean, I think the top 10 teams in the rankings are probably, the teams that should
Oh
be the
yeah,
top 10 teams in the state. I might reorganize if I was doing it objectively just by hand. I'd probably put North Allegheny above Central Catholic just because they made it all the way to the championship game. But
right.
other than that, I think the top 10 teams on the list were pretty much the top 10 statewide.
I agree.
All right. On to 5A, where Peters Township won their first WPIAL championship in school history. And I guess kind of a historic year all around. Peters winning their first WPIAL title, and then Imhotep finally, getting to the top of the mountain after being 1-6 in state championship games. And you had talked all year, and Bob Long, our buddy out of Philadelphia, last week on our state championship show, said, this is what Imhotep's been preparing for all year. Was they were preparing and had their eyes set on finally, slaying the white whale and getting to the top of the mountain and actually winning that state championship after they'd lost so many in a row. And they did it. Credit to them. They put together a great season. They had a great team, full of what I think I saw 15 D1 recruits or something like that. Like they just had a loaded roster, a 3-year starter at quarterback who had a fantastic game, and just the depth of skill position players that they had was way too much for Peters Township. And credit to Peters, they did something that had never been done in school history, won a WPIAL title, made it all the way to the state championship game, and really all year had ridden a defense that was just outstanding and didn't really have, I think, just one D1 recruit on that defense for Peters, but just played with a lot of heart and a lot of guts, and we're a really, really good high school team.
Yeah, and quite honestly, Peters kept pretty much everything in front of them the entire first half. And I know that the one thing that I mentioned during my halftime report with Dave Micah on this game is that I felt that, that Imhotep was due for one of those big, long runs there. And sure enough, we start off the first possession of the third quarter and, long touchdown run for Imhotep Charter kind of took the wind out of the Peters sails. And you're right. I think, and I talked about it a bunch of times that I think that, ran out of the emotions, just kind of the tank ran dry finally from this emotional ride and what have you. But Peters has nothing to be ashamed of. Imhotep Charter with the depth of talent and, the singular focus to get back to a championship game and win, just was huge. And you could just hear a gigantic exhale at the end of the game from the Imhotep Charter. And I'll be honest with you, I never saw, Imhotep was always a team that everybody always said they didn't travel well with fans or whatever like that. I tell you what, they sure traveled well here. These fans supported them, and yeah, it was something to watch. Just as with Peters, they were just enormously supported, and that was true with all of the teams. I think attendance at the state championships, coming east, west, north, south, whatever, was just exemplary for all of the schools. But the hats off to Peters, and in a runner-up role too.
Yeah, and I think you brought up an important point that, for these teams that lost in state championship games, losing stings right now, and it's, you're a little sore about it and your season's over. But, in a few years, when you look back on it, it's going to be, wow, we won the first WPIAL title in school history and made it all the way to the state championship game. And that's what they're going to be remembered for, right?
Correct. Exactly right.
It's not a knock on them that they were the runners up. They were they were the runners up in the state. That it's a
all these guys are going to be legends in their school. Yeah. Oh, yeah. He was on the state runner-up team back in 2023. You're exactly right. It stings now, but these guys are going to live. Are going to be legends in their school for being on that 2023 team that made it to the state championship game.
Yeah, and really around these parts, because there are still people who value the WPIAL title more than the state title. It'll be, they were on the WPIAL championship team is what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And and it's gonna be, yeah, we were WPIAL champions and we made it all the way to the, we won another game. And sometimes there is that letdown, kind of after you get out of the WPIAL, that just winning the WPIAL, especially in 5A this year, was hard. I mean, 5A was tough. There was a lot of really good teams that they had to go through, and they dominated all of them. But 5A was tough to get through this year. And you saw a little bit of that letdown against Cocalico in the state semis, that like they had expended so much energy just to get through the WPIAL championship and win the first one in school history, that then when they finally did it, they were kind of, like you said, running on fumes
Yeah,
eventually when they
correct.
even.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How much emotion and how much of that was still left in the tank. I mean, you've reached the unreachable star, and so
Yep. And our WPIAL player of the year in 5A is Nolan DeLucia, sophomore quarterback from Peters Township. So this is not the last we'll be hearing of Peters
yeah,
Township. And the crazy thing here is, he wasn't the starter last year. They had another kid, Chris Sabroni, who was the starter last year. And Chris returned this year and played a little bit in week 0. And then Nolan played a little bit. And I think Chris might have got hurt and Nolan kind of took over. But I mean, he grabbed the reins, and 3,000 passing yards, 33 passing touchdowns, plus almost 500 yards on the ground. Those are fantastic numbers for a sophomore quarterback, and especially at the 5A level. So it's going to be exciting to see where Nolan can take Peters in the future. And Peters' defense this year, 5 shutouts, holding WPIAL opponents to just 7 points a game. Really, Imhotep, I think, was the first team that really scored a lot of points on them. I think Bethel Park scored 20 some in the season finale, but that game was like 62-28 or something like that. So that one, I'm kind of like, they gave up
yeah,
some points in garbage time.
yeah,
That wasn't really a close game. But yeah, Imhotep was really the first one that kind of put it on Peters' defense over a full game. But some of the other big stories here, Ethan Pillar for Pine Richland, Josh Bladel for Moon, they took over as kind of that wildcat quarterback option mid-season for both of those teams, led their teams to semifinals. Julian Duggar, the Pitt commit at Penn Hills, seemingly had his team, just about in the WPIAL championship game, leading Pine Richland in the semifinals with 2 minutes to go before Pine Richland pulled off that miraculous drive to send them back to the WPIAL title game. And all that. So it was, a great season for Julian. Best of luck at Pitt next year. And our game of the year was in week 8. And this was the week that Dan mentioned. I was at the KDKA studios, but Upper St. Clair and Moon went to double overtime and we're going back and forth. And we had it on the TV in the studio kind of while we were broadcasting the post-game show. And, Moon would score, Upper St. Clair would score, and then Upper St. Clair scored and went for 2 in the win and got it. And even though it wound up that Upper St. Clair didn't make the playoffs, which was the big storyline in 5A this year, it was still an outstanding back and forth double overtime game between 2 teams in the thick of the playoff hunt.
yeah.
All right. So our big storylines, obviously, Peters' dominance on defense. I mentioned the Wildcat quarterbacks. And then the playoff tiebreakers that eliminated Upper St. Clair and Woodland Hills. We talked a lot about those on the show. And statewide, at least to me, the ones that stood out were Imhotep, and then Roman Catholic really gave Imhotep one of the biggest challenges they got from anyone this year. So I think they're a team to potentially watch in the future, especially if Imhotep gets bumped up to 6A next year. And then Cocalico going back-to-back in D3, and Chester on a historic run out of District 1, getting further than they'd ever gotten before.
No, you hit them all there, Ian. And it was other than the top heavy issue related to Imhotep and Roman Catholic, 5A was a gigantic mosh pit across the state, this year, of a lot of good teams just really fighting it out. And with Peters really prevailing, from the from the West and Imhotep in the East there. So, but actually, Peter's having to go through Cocalico. I mean, we consider, Cocalico, an Eastern team, but actually they came out of the West bracket, with Peters. So, yeah, those are the top two teams in 5A, on the Western side there. So,
Yep. And I think it'll be interesting moving forward how this all plays out, because like we said, Peters has a sophomore quarterback in Nolan DeLucia. Pine Richland found something with their freshman quarterback Aaron Obi Strader, and he led that game-winning drive against Penn Hills. Penn Hills is going to have to reload a little bit next year, and then if Imhotep moves up to 6A because of the success formula, this is potentially a wide open 5A field.
yeah, it is. And I think too, and I don't know, have all of the numbers, obviously, the one thing that's going to be, I think, the big headline in the off season, is going to be the realignment. WPIAL and conferences and teams going up, down, all around. I haven't had time to dissect enrollment numbers and where it's going to end up and everything else. But wow, that's really going to be the story, is the enrollment numbers and the realignment as it affects every classification.
Yeah, and I plugged them all into a spreadsheet and started playing around with it a little bit. So for those out there listening, stay tuned to my website, steelcityblitz.com. I'll have some more info forthcoming. Wanted to get through the end of the regular season first, but we will talk about that a little more later in the show. I do have a little slide on it. In 4A, Aliquippa.
Hey. And there was
I mean,
much rejoicing.
I don't know if I have words anymore for how awesome and historic it is of just everything this senior class at Aliquippa has done. I mean, they've, and not just this senior class, but this run Aliquippa is on, 16 straight WPIAL championship games dating back to 2008. Now winning 3 straight WPIAL titles, reaching 3 straight state championship games, winning, winning 2 out of the last 3 state titles. Mike Warfield, the head coach, has won 3 state championships. And, when Aliquippa didn't renew Mike Smianik's contract, and when they brought in Mike Warfield, one of the things they said was they wanted to be competitors on the statewide level more so than they had been, under Mike Smianik. They felt like they weren't reaching that full potential. And Coach Warfield has won more titles in 6 years at Aliquippa, having to play 3 classifications above their enrollment number. And I mean, the state made it even harder for them, right? The state forced them to play higher, and they're still winning. It's hard for me to put it into words just how amazing this accomplishment for Aliquippa is, that winning 2 state titles in 3 years, and just the senior class that they had. And that's not taking away anything from the underclassmen, because like Tyke Hayes, all those other guys are really darn good underclassmen too. But just this run they've had is outstanding and really unmatched, I think, in WPIAL history. The only one I could think of that comes close was the Clairton teams of the early 2000 or the early 2010s, that had Tyler Boyd and the Killer T's, Tyler Boyd, Titus Howard, Tarish Webb. Trenton Coles was a year older than those guys, but was still one of the Killer T's. They won 4 straight state titles. But other than that Clairton team, I mean, this run by Aliquippa is one of the best I've ever seen, if not the best. And I think what makes it even more impressive is the fact that they're playing 3 classifications higher than their enrollment.
Those words never come out of Coach Warfield's mouth. I mean, when I interview, I'm
awesome.
just saying,
yeah.
He's just talking. He just talks on what's in front of him. The post game interview that I had with Coach he was as cool as a cucumber, and obviously he was embracing the championship, but everything that was so proud of his players and the organization and the community, And there was no talk of like, oh, we're playing, look at us, we're playing like 4 classifications higher than what we should have and whatever like that. That's just not in the thought process. It's like, what's in front of them? What's the next task? What mountain have we got to climb next? And he is so very proud of his team and his school and what they've accomplished. And yeah, that's just it's just great stuff. And obviously Dan, knows a little bit more about what's going on, obviously, than we all do. But my gosh, what an accomplishment. And we'll see how it goes. I got some noise that's in my background there. I
Well,
don't know.
that's the risk you take being out on the deck. Those nightly noises, you never know what's going to happen out there. But I mean, the other thing too with Aliquippa, I think, is that part of the story of this season is the opening of Heinz Field, and we talked about it a little bit at the opening with Dan Zangrilli from KDKA. We're very honored that he took time out of his night to join us, and they, kicked off the season with a KDKA game of the week there when they opened the new stadium. And I think just the way this whole season came together, and let's not forget also they continue to find ways to motivate themselves, right? And you talked about this with the coaches, the players you interviewed on the field, that this was the first undefeated state champions in Aliquippa history. So, even with all these records that they have and everything they've been
It
able
was
to
a first.
accomplish, they're able to find these firsts that they can do. They won their 100th WPIAL playoff game in school history this year. It's just like the amount of success this town and this city has had at high school football is incredible. And even back to our interview with Mayor Walker at the beginning of the year, talking about how it is a true, community effort and everything that goes into it. And with the new stadium and what they'll be able to bring to the community with that, and how they'll be able to, honor the past kids that have come through. And really actually thinking back even further to, Darrell Rivas getting into the Hall of Fame this year and bringing all these kids to Canton, Ohio, was kind of how the Aliquippa season started. That started at the Hall of Fame, opened a new field, and ended as state champions, which is just an awesome
It's just
2023.
it is just like mind-boggling to me. When I when you say all of that and then you witness it in person and then you talk to guys like Tyke Hayes and then Coach Warfield after the game, you understand why there is such excellence, in this group, in always striving, always trying to achieve more and better results, because that's the goal, is to always get better. And God, they certainly did that this year.
They did. They did. So speaking of Tyke Hayes, he is our WPIAL Blitz Player of the Year for the second straight year. Over 2,000 rushing yards, 26 touchdowns, just an all-around outstanding season. And I probably could have just done the whole honorable mention list to be all Aliquippa kids because they were so good. I had to include a couple others, but Aliquippa's defensive backs, and you saw this in the state championship game too, just trying. And Aliquippa has done this for years. And obviously, I mean, they have 2 defensive backs in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So we know that, with Ty Law and Darrell Rivas, that they've produced some good talent over the years too. But, they get up by a couple scores and then you have to throw the ball. And then they've got these dudes on the back end. And it's just like, well, how do we
You just
even.
played right into their hands.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And it's very interesting because that's the way that the Indianapolis Colts used to play defense, knowing full well that they were going to be ahead. They modeled their defense by the fact that people were going to have to pass, even though they wanted to run. They're going to have to pass against them, and that's that's a great philosophy. And clearly, just like you talked about, they know that people are going to have to throw against them, and they're prepared for it.
Yep. Yep. Cam Lindsay, the linebacker, he's going to Pitt next year. That dude's just a big game player. He seems to always, shine in those big moments. And I can't wait to see what he does at the next level. Quentin Good, who's the winningest quarterback in Aliquippa history, is a 3-year starter. It just all around, just an awesome, awesome group of
Yeah,
kids
and
they
let's
had
talk a
this
little
year.
bit about obviously, some of the breaking of the mold too, for Aliquippa players now in the fold for Ivy League scholarships now they opened up a whole nother avenue for these players, that Ivy League schools are offering and looking at these guys as well because of obviously the improvement in the overall with grades and everything like that. So just another aspect of the improvement here at Aliquippa, and that too on the academic and Ivy League side. I think that maybe the one of the biggest accomplishments, along with the undefeated season there too.
Yeah, and last year when we were fortunate enough to have Coach Warfield on the show, he talked about that they weren't just there to play football; they were there to you know mold young men into adults and all that, and the life lessons that they were learning that off the field were more important than what they were learning on the field in many occasions. And you're right, Brandon Banks, the defensive back wide receiver who's going to Yale next year, like that's so cool. And I think we're
That's great.
first Aliquippa athlete since the 1980s to go to an Ivy League school. Like that's incredible.
Yeah, good stuff.
And I did have to, give a shout out to Latrobe here in the game of the year because they played Aliquippa tougher than pretty much anyone. Latrobe, credit to them, they hung in there against the Quips in the quarterfinals and gave them an absolute battle. Aliquippa pulled away late, but that game was back and forth all night. That was an outstanding one. John Wetzel, the dual threat quarterback from Latrobe, but Latrobe has a junior running back linebacker named Alex Tash, who definitely going to be a player to watch coming in the future because that kid was a tank. Speaking of tanks, Keith Spell from McKeesport, also on our honorable mentions list. He kind of got inserted into McKeesport's running game mid-season. Anthony Boyd was the go-to back, but then when Keith Spell got mixed in, he had a playoff game performance, I think, where he had 3 rushing touchdowns, 5 sacks on defense as like a defensive lineman. Like the dude was just a tank and just impossible to bring down. Jake Wolf, the dual threat quarterback from Montour, had an outstanding season, led them to their only regular season loss was against Aliquippa. They got all the way to the semifinals. Jonah Williamson, the dual threat quarterback from Trinity, who led his team to an upset victory over Thomas Jefferson. And then Evan Wright from Mars, Coach Casper in his passing game, in year 2 at Mars, got them to the semifinals, and we'll see where that can continue to grow as Coach Casper, really puts his mold on that program. But they still haven't forgot how to run the ball at Mars, and Evan Wright had a great year as well. So our storylines, I kind of hit them all. The other one that we didn't mention was Thomas Jefferson missing the semifinals for the first time since 2011, going out in the quarters this year. Montour's resurgence, a big part of that they beat TJ in the quarterfinals, beating TJ for the first time ever in the playoffs. And then really statewide, it was Dallas beating McDevitt in the semifinals. I think that was the big story. But that was a very, very good, very talented Dallas team that excelled in all 3 phases. And, from what I saw and read and heard about that game against McDevitt, it was the 3rd phase of the game where they won. They blocked multiple kicks. They really, did it on special teams, and you can't forget about that.
You can't. And we'll talk about special teams yet as there was a state championship game determined by special teams as well. But the funny thing was, I'll be honest with you, I had that conversation with Coach Wechter before the game. His field goal kickers out there warming up or whatever like that. And I said, well, how far would you like, have this guy go? And, it was unfortunately the Achilles heel that Dallas had to take advantage of to beat McDevitt because they weren't going to beat him, man on man. Yet teams have to there are other ways to skin a cat in football, and special teams is usually one of them. and recovering 2 onside kicks at the same place. Hey, that's all film study. I mean, you kick it in the same place there, in a block punt, kick return for a touchdown. You block, you block an extra point. You block a field goal, and one of those onside kicks that recover. Oh, by the way, leads to an extra possession that leads to a touchdown. I mean, that was a 14-point swing. It went to double overtime. Okay, so I don't know what to say. But it was the game of the year in 4A across the state that Dallas upset of McDevitt in double overtime that I was on the field for. So I was very lucky to be there and just really enjoyed that one.
Yep. Yep. So, and in my final statewide rankings, once again, you can kind of see here, especially how tiered the teams start to get. That Aliquippa's rating far and away better than pretty much everybody else's, and Aliquippa's postseason success, I think, helped pull up some of the other WPIAL teams. Mars, who Aliquippa beat in the semifinals, was a good team. But you see Dallas, who came into the state championship game undefeated, didn't make the list. So a lot of this was kind of based on who you beat and what classification they were in and how many wins they had. So
Sure.
yeah, but overall, Aliquippa, very deserving 4A champions. Congratulations to the Quips and everyone involved in their program. Oh, one other thing I should mention while we're talking about Aliquippa, far more important than football, was I saw an article last week that the city of Aliquippa, as a governmental entity, was able to get out of Act 47, which is like the state's basically bankruptcy program for municipal governments. That, like, when your municipal government is broke, like, governments can't go out of business. So you declare you're in Act 47, and the state brings in consultants and people to like help you get back on track. And after, I think, I don't remember how many years it was. It was like decades. It was a long time that Aliquippa had been in Act 47. That they finally got out. So that's an amazing accomplishment for that community, to be able to not have to rely on the state to tell you how you have to operate, but to be able to basically be self-governing now and do what they want, and not have the state tell them, well, this is how you have to run your community because you have no money and we're telling you what to do. So that's everything they accomplished on the football field was amazing, but all the work that went into that for everyone involved community wide, that's an amazing accomplishment for any community in Pennsylvania. So congratulations to Mayor Walker and everyone else involved. I'm sure we could do an entire show just listing the people involved and the decades long approach to Aliquippa getting out of the state's Act 47 program. So congratulations, everyone.
Okay. And our friends at Go MVB, who have been supporters of the program all year, it's as easy as going to gomvb.com or check out their Twitter handle at GoMVB to see what they're doing for the athletes that they're representing. And they are a public relations firm that specializes in promoting athletes of all sports, not just football. And Ian and I have talked all year long. Just go to gomvb.com, especially /SSM special. Got some special rates for GoMVB on putting together, not only managing all of your social media, but putting together your own specific web page with all of your pertinent information like highlights, SAT scores, grades, you name it. And like I said, gomvb.com, just check them out and you'll be sold just like all these athletes nationwide.
Yep, and this is definitely now something as we are
recruiting time of year.
Yep, as we're wrapping up the football season, and guys are putting together their year-end highlight packages and all that, and players are still out there competing for scholarships, and we've got thousands upon thousands of players entering the transfer portal, that those kids in the transfer portal are also kind of competing against, high school kids for scholarships with teams, that it's always important to put your best foot forward and put your best face out there on social media.
Yeah, absolutely right.
And we,
Absolutely right. You can't have any missteps if you want to play college sports.
yeah. And we thank GoMVB for their support of the show all year. All right. So moving on to 3A, where Bell Vernon pulled off the repeats, got their back-to-back state title. They were an absolute force in 3A this year. When you look at their schedule, they had some tight games early in the year, but we talked about this a lot all season, that they played one of the toughest non-conference slates of any team, playing McKeesport, who was a 4A finalist, Penn Trafford, who was a 5A playoff team, Thomas Jefferson, the only team they lost to, was a 4A playoff team. And then once they got into the 3A portion of their schedule, just looking at the results they had, there was no doubt that Bell Vernon was the best team statewide. Putting up 49 plus against every 3A opponent they faced up until the WPIAL title game, when they beat Avonworth 26-0. And then 42 against Hickory in the state semis, 38 against Northwestern Lehigh in the state championship. And then on the defensive side of the ball too, the only 3A teams that scored more than once against Bell Vernon was Elizabeth Forward in week 9, who lost 49-28. And then Hickory, who they beat 42-16 in the state semis. So just an all-around outstanding performance from Bell Vernon. They brought back, I think, 21 out of 22 starters from last year, and really just had an outstanding performance. And one of the other things that we had talked about all year was the way that they had kept Quentin Martin fresh, their Penn State recruit at running back, and worked in these other guys. And you saw it in the state championship game, right? Anthony Cruz comes out, boom, returns the opening kickoff for a touchdown, and then bang, gets another, 60-some yard touchdown on Bell Vernon's first offensive possession. And all of a sudden it's 14-0, and Quentin Martin's barely touched the ball. So it was an all-around great performance for this Bell Vernon squad. And congratulations to them and Coach Humbert, now back-to-back state champions. And if people didn't get a chance to go see the interview that Bruce did with Coach Humbert and his kids on the field after the state title game, that was pretty cool. Having Matt's kids there, because as a father myself, like anytime I get to bring my kids to things, it's really cool.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. Coach Humbert, I tell you what, so giving of his time. I mean, my God, I must have been standing out on the field for 40 minutes after the game, before I was able to speak with him. And literally the only people on the field at that time were Coach, his kids, his wife, and me. So it was pretty easy there. But you could see, I mean, what that shows is that these men are, they're family men. They're, they have a lot of the same deal with the same things that we all do each and every day, and trying to manage being a husband and a father, as well as being a football coach. And but his kids had a great time. I know that his family was off at Hershey Park while he was getting ready for the game on Friday. But speaking at the game there, the defensive effort that the Leopards put up there was, I mean, Northwest Lehigh couldn't do anything. They tried everything, nothing worked. I mean, and that defense, I mean, they were hitting hard. They were so physical at the point of attack. Northwest Lehigh, they tried everything. They tried running the ball, they tried throwing the ball, and nothing. Bell Vernon gave up nothing. A tremendous defensive effort by the Leopards, and boy, really deserving of a championship. But those big plays that they put out there, and Quentin Martin had that 92-yard touchdown run as well, there as well, which, yeah, very, you can see why Penn State's interested in that guy. And quite honestly, I think he played a better game on defense that he did on offense there too. So Quentin Martin, really a solid performance as well for Bell Vernon.
Yeah, and Coach Franklin came to a couple of these games, right? Because he's got Quentin Martin at Bell
Yeah, I
Vernon,
don't think he
Tyke
was
Hayes
at
at
any of the
Aliquippa.
afternoon games, but he was at yeah, a couple of the evening games there. He was quite a character, quite honestly. It was
He
talking
flies in
about
on
the
his
officiating a
helicopter.
little
And
bit, but
yeah.
anyway.
And speaking of Quentin Martin, he is our 3A WPIAL Blitz Player of the Year. And I think the other thing he did this year too is they used him a lot more in the passing game. That Braden Locks really expanded his role as the quarterback for Bell Vernon. And last year, Bell Vernon was such a run heavy team, and this year they opened it up a little bit more and were able to be a little bit more dynamic on offense. And Quentin Martin was a big part of that, leading the team in both rushing and receiving. So congratulations to Quentin Martin. Best of luck in the future. What a career at Bell Vernon for Quentin Martin that he's had. In our honorable mentions, Andrew Cuban from Avonworth. I mean, what a season this kid had. He was just all over the place on offense, defense, special teams, as a kick returner, as a safety, as a receiver, as a running back. He kind of did it all for Avonworth. Charlie Nagut from Elizabeth Forward was kind of the same mold, just a do-it-all kind of kid. And Derek Burke from Deer Lakes and Cody Mullen from Knock, the two quarterbacks that led their teams to some historic successes. And our game of the year this year wasn't really a close game, but it was a meaningful game because Deer Lakes won their first playoff game in school history. We got to interview Coach Burke after that game. So that was our game of the year, just for what it meant for Deer Lakes and their program. And shout out to Armand Hill, the running back from West Mifflin, who, as a freshman, came in mid-season and just lit it up, put up like over 1,400 yards in over just the second half of the season. Had a game, I think he ran for 498, which was the second highest total in WPIAL history in 1 week. So just an all-around awesome performance. Can't wait to see what he does next. And like you mentioned, Bell Vernon's line play on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, was just outstanding. I think that's always been the hallmark of Coach Humbert's team, just how fundamentally sound they are at the point of attack, being gap strong and just getting guys on the ground. They're great tacklers. Every time I've ever seen them play, I'm always impressed by how good they are at just tackling the ball and getting the guy on the ground.
Coach Humbert gets my award for best post game speech to his team. I mean, he was doing the most muscular pose or whatever like that post game. I mean, he was fired up, but just an excellent effort there by the Leopards. It was funny, and I like to talk to the coaches before they really get all frothing at the mouth or whatever like that. But seeing Coach Humbert walking out, I said, you win this championship, and you're in rarefied air. I mean, not many teams win consecutive state championships, and they went out and did it. So,
Yep. And just awesome for him. I mean, we've had him on the show a few times, and just such a cool dude to talk to. And he's actually like expanded his Twitter presence a little bit this year, and
oh
like
my,
posted some like pump up videos and things like that before the games, and some recap videos after the games that
great!
folks in their social media departments put together. And it's the stuff that Bell Vernon's put out this year has been pretty good.
Well,
And
good.
I have to mention too that since we're talking about 3A, Avonworth football has one of the best football team Twitter accounts that there is. And for years, Avonworth has always had a great Twitter account. Like from the time I first started following it, back in the 2010s, like Avonworth's Twitter account does a great job of promoting their team and giving updates on games and putting out stats and all that. So shout out to the folks that run that too. All right, so our storylines, we hit on most of these. Deer Lakes winning their first playoff game in school history. Knock going from 1-9 last year to 8-2 this year. East Allegheny winning their first conference title since 2000. Then Armand Hill, the freshman running back from West Mifflin. Really statewide, it seemed like at least to me, and I actually think the top three are probably pretty close to right here. That the WPIAL teams were probably among the best teams statewide. Like, if you had put Elizabeth forward in the statewide tournament, I think they probably could have won the whole thing. Same with Avonworth. It was just they couldn't get through Bell Vernon on the WPIAL side. But I think those three WPIAL teams were probably the three best teams statewide. WYO had a really good year, lost that tough semifinal game to Northwestern Lehigh, who was also a very good team. And then Newman Goretti, who got upset earlier in the playoffs too.
Yeah, no, it's hard. Yeah, it did boil down to, the WPIAL and that Northwestern Lehigh, why missing matchup in the East there. So yeah, hard to argue with that. Hard to argue with the fact that 3A, I think that there's going to be some big changes in 3A, moving forward on the hierarchy after everything shakes out between enrollment and realignment. So
yes, because Bell Vernon is moving up to 4A, and that's it's not a success formula thing. Their enrollment just moved them back up to 4A.
sure.
So
Mm-hmm.
they had kind of been right on the cusp because they were 4A previously and then moved down to 3A for 2 years, and now we're back up into 4A. So they're moving up. So you're right.
But Central Valley moves down though, right?
Possibly.
Okay. Well, we'll see. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll actually have a slide on that later. So we'll talk about that later.
All right.
Yes. All right. In 2A, Beaver Falls from the number 10 seed won the WPIAL championship, defeating Steel Valley in a rematch of last year's championship game. And then statewide, Southern Columbia won their 14th championship in a close one over Westinghouse. This was the closest game of the weekend, and Westinghouse, it was back and forth, kind of had them on the ropes. And then Southern Columbia put together a 99-yard drive at the end to go win it. That was enabled by a penalty call on a fourth down play when there was a sack and a turnover that they called a holding away from the play. So I'll just leave it at that. That's what happened.
Ranked up there with like the tuck rule with Tom Brady, if you remember too. I mean, some of that was the stuff of legend.
Yeah. So any takeaways from this game? This Southern Columbia Westinghouse game was a bit closer than it was last year. Obviously, Westinghouse was there to play and were certainly strong contenders and arguably should have won the title if the ref hadn't thrown a flag away from the play. But it is what it is, and Southern Columbia went out and won the game. And even after the penalty, the penalty didn't give them a touchdown. Southern Columbia still had to go out and execute, and they were able to do it and put it in the end zone.
And a failed 2-point conversion by Westinghouse. Okay, was key. I felt that just the mindset. I saw it all postseason, that these missed extra points, just in the mindset of the team that's got to go down there, we got a chance to win this game with a touchdown and an extra point. Versus, if they're down by 7, what are they, or 8? Okay, in that particular case, it would have been 8 points. But talking to, I used the word when I was interviewing Coach Roth at the end of the game, mythical, and it just, he even said, the words out of his own mouth, said that if they wrote a Hollywood script about this, nobody would believe it, and which is true. Those words came out of his mouth post game, not mine. And to win, to go 99 yards, to win a 7th straight championship, and obviously, there were like 2 fourth down plays in there. I was told by a credible source that there was a play call texted in by Julian Fleming on one of the fourth down plays that they got. They used his play that he texted in. I mean, that's the stuff of legend. And regardless of, obviously, There's, and you throw the officiating in there, the officiating calls and whatever like that. And it's just something that you could never imagine. And, the other thing too, I was standing in the end zone. Those guys are huddling in the end zone, 6 feet away from me when they're getting ready to start this 99-yard drive. And I'm looking at all these guys' eyes. Okay. I'm looking at those guys. I can tell you unequivocally, there did not seem to be any doubt. It was complete. Everybody's quiet. Everybody's ready to go. Um, at that moment, at that time, when I looked in there, I'm going like, these guys are going to score. And that's what I felt just by looking at the guys. So you kind of put that all together. The word mythical came out of my mouth when I talked to Coach Roth, and he didn't disagree. So
Yep.
pretty
And
crazy stuff, man. I'm telling you, pretty
shout
crazy
out
stuff.
to and shout out to Westinghouse too, and what
Yeah.
Coach
Oh
Green
my.
has been able to put together there. For a program in the Pittsburgh City League that the City League had kind of been downtrodden for years. What never really made much of an impact on the state level, really, since like the Rod Rutherford Perry High teams in the was that 2002 2003 kind of time frame. That Westinghouse making an impact on a statewide level is good for the City League, good for all of Western Pennsylvania. And I wish the City League and the WPIAL would merge so they could play the WPIAL teams all year, because that would be super fun. But they're a great program as well that they've started to put together there at Westinghouse. So shout out
And
to them.
yeah, and all that talk about last year, that didn't materialize. I tell you what, those fans and that organization, there was there was there was no mention of it. And as the game went on, it was all just fantastic. Above board, everybody rooting for their team, stuff, and it just was just a fantastic game, just an incredible ending that no one could ever imagine. I
Yeah.
mean, so how does that happen? I mean, how does that happen in sports? That's why people gravitate to sports, because it's the last true unscripted aspect to really to the in reality. It totally unscripted, and how it ends up, you really don't have any idea. And this is one of those games.
Well, and bringing things full circle, right? Like the other side of the slide, Beaver Falls was a number 10 seed. They were 5 and
Yeah,
5 in the regular season. They were
right.
the first 500 team to ever win a WPIAL title. And like you said, you never know
You
what
never know.
what happens when two teams step on the field. And Beaver Falls put together that run in the playoffs. D'Italian Buford, their running back, scored 3 2-point conversions that wound up being the decisive scores in their quarterfinal, semifinal, and WPIAL championship games to win them that title. Like Beaver Falls in the semifinals against Washington gave up 4 defensive touchdowns and won 28-26. Like it's just wild. So yeah, Beaver Falls had an awesome year. And in 2A, there was such a wide breadth of talent that it was really hard to put this slide together and pick like who was the player of the year, who were
Yeah.
our honorable mentions. Javen Peel, the freshman quarterback from Western Beaver, was among the WPIAL's passing leaders. Jay Rona from Mohawk with all his great receivers. Um, you know, they took Mohawk to heights they hadn't been before. Mohawk had never been past the quarterfinals, and they made it to the semifinals this year. I think Mohawk had won 3 playoff games in their school history, and they won 2 more this year just to get to the semifinals. And Donald Barksdale from Steel Valley did win our player of the year, and he was just electric. I mean, he was unstoppable. Like a normal game for him was, 200 yards and 5 touchdowns, and just was able to get free a couple times in the WPIAL championship, but Beaver Falls defense really shut him down in the title game, and Beaver Falls drove it down the field at the end of the game, scored a touchdown with a minute left, and D'Italian Buford scored that 2-point conversion with just under a minute to go to win the title for Steel Valley. And like you said, it's one of those things you can never predict how things are going to wind up. The games of the year in 2A were both of the Neshannock Beaver Falls games. In the regular season, they played a 1-point game where it went to
Wow.
overtime. Beaver Falls went for 2 and missed and lost. Then they met again in the quarterfinals. Neshannock wound up winning the Midwestern Conference title. Oops. And in the quarterfinals, Beaver Falls blocked a punt and returned it for a touchdown to cut the lead to 13-12, and then went for 2, and Italian Buford obviously scored and won the game. So 2 games decided by a point
Incredible.
each, both of them essentially on a 2-point conversion. Just awesome matchups between those
That
two.
only that only just reinforces what I talked about. Who I mean, who would believe that but could actually happen?
Mm-hmm.
But it did.
Yep. And finally, I think we've touched on most of the storylines. Beaver Falls winning it all from the 10 seed. Waynesburg and Elwood City making the playoffs after decade plus droughts for both of them. So that was pretty cool to see for those schools. Southern Columbia wins again. Westinghouse nearly slayed the Giant. And the one to keep an eye on this offseason is that
Yeah.
Farrell out of District 10 made a petition to join the WPIAL. So we'll be keeping our eyes on that. I think, back when we talked with Tom Reisenweber from the Erie Times News, he mentioned that, it had to go through the PIAA, and then I think District 10 had a meeting in December, and the WPIAL meets in January to kind of decide things. So that's going to potentially shake things up into a WPIAL hierarchy as well. But statewide,
I
Southern
think that
Columbia, and
shakes up statewide. I mean,
yeah,
that instead of Farrell and a WPIAL champion getting to the postseason, you have the potential, basically only one of that. I think it only, I guess it only bodes well for other 2A teams in the Western half. You know what I'm saying? But
yeah,
it's kind of very similar to what, obviously, 5A, it came out of District 12 is like what 2A will be coming out of the WPIAL. I mean, but
could be,
look at there. I
yeah,
mean, in essence, what you've got is like 5 teams in theory that were of your top 10, being in the WPIAL, like in 4A. And that's what I talk about. Like maybe like getting some wild card teams so that you have an opportunity to, like, all right, if there's a log jam in one particular district of a lot of good teams, why are you penalizing the district by only taking one, where maybe a wild card team that could go to the other side of the bracket? I think that they would be happy with that. And so that they've got to go on the road, they'd be happy to at least get in and get an opportunity. And I was talking a lot about that on the sidelines this weekend, and a lot of people like that idea of the wild card. I wasn't talking to anybody in the hierarchy there of the PIAA, like Mr. Lombardi, who was in the end zone for all 6 games. By the way, fans, the guy is out there with all the fans, all 6 games. He's out there with everybody. In fact, most of the staff of the PIAA, they're right down there in the end zone with everybody. Freezing there took us off just like everybody else in these games, but talking with everybody, and they just did a great job. But yeah, I got a lot of positive reaction to like that wild card thing, Ian. So who knows?
that's interesting. That's good to know. So we'll see how it all plays
We'll
out.
we'll see how far that goes.
Yeah, yeah. So in 1A, uh, Fort Cherry winning their first WPIAL title in school history, which is an awesome accomplishment for them. Uh, Made it all the way to the state title game, where they fell to Steel High, who was the defending state champs. Steel High winning their third state title in 4 years. The Irby brothers, just an outstanding performance. And like we talked about last week on our preview show, I said, I think this could potentially be a game that's kind of the changing of the guard statewide. That Alex Irby, Steel High's quarterbacks, the leading passer in state history. He set all the state records. He broke the state single season touchdown record in this game. And this game was kind of the coronation of Alex Irby as one of the great all-time quarterbacks in Pennsylvania high school history. And that's absolutely what it was, and probably what it should have been for the career that he had. But also, Matt Seg, the dual threat quarterback from Fort Cherry, is only a sophomore, so he's got 2 years now where potentially has a chance to go out there and put his name and stake his claim to also being on that list of one of the highly regarded quarterbacks in Pennsylvania history as well.
Yeah, and they really kept Matt under wraps. He really didn't get loose much at all. I think he did have, like, maybe there was one long run. I think he had like a 60-yard run um in the game, but they pretty much kept him, in front of everything. And boy, Steel High sure mixed it up. They were totally unpredictable. I thought the offensive play calling that they had was pretty outstanding. And if you don't account for, Alex Irby, you're going to pay the price, which, a couple times, running the football, he really excelled as well. But, um, you know, Coach Gary and I mean, again, literally, he just walked off the bus and we sat there, we were standing there in the parking lot just talking and whatever like that. And what a great guy. And, obviously bringing this team to, this particular level. Um, Man, it was hard. This was a hard game for me because obviously knowing Coach Gary through the show and then meeting him for the first time there was something special. But it's been special for me too, knowing Coach Irby for the amount of years that I've known him and his kids. Um, Sometimes the toughest part about covering high school sports here is situations like this where you have friends on both sides, and unfortunately, somebody's going to lose, and that's bad. I mean, it tears me apart. I can tell you that. But such great men, such great teams. They should, embrace the fact that they had wonderful seasons, both of them.
Yeah, and I think my takeaway from this game, like you mentioned with the play calling, was the way Steel High was able to get the ball quickly out to the perimeter and make Fort Cherry's linebackers chase sideline to sideline. And then once they got him moving sideways, they hit him with Alex Irby up the
Right up
middle.
the middle.
And they just had no response for it, and it was just the talent that Steel High had on the field. Their two wide receivers were outstanding. They were a highly impressive team and deserve all the accolades. And Fort Cherry, like we said with Peters Township, this will go down. These kids will remember it as the year they won the WPIAL title for the first time in school history. Coach Gary, when we had him on after they won that title, talked about Thanksgiving dinners with his dad and his grandpa, where his grandfather had coached at the school for 40 years, and the stadium's named after him, and his dad had coached there for 9 years, and they had these Thanksgiving dinner discussions of if you could build an all-time Fort Cherry offensive line, which 5 kids would you pick, and things like that, and now he can go to those as the one that brought the title home to Fort Cherry. So that's really cool. I'm happy
Yeah,
for him.
right.
And his family, because it's a family accomplishment. He's got a bunch of relatives on the staff too, so that's really cool. And we'll see where they go next year because they've got some kids coming back too.
Yep.
Our 1A player of the year probably should be no surprise. Matt Seg joined the 1,000 club for the second time in his career, just the second player in WPIAL history to do that. The first is named Sky Moore from Shady Side Academy, who is playing for the Kansas City Chiefs right now. And just a lot of outstanding players in 1A this year. The level of talent in 1A was so deep that there were darn good players. Tyree Turner from Greensburg Central Catholic that I had to leave off this slide just because I didn't have enough space for them all. Jaden Floyd from Leechburg was also a 1,000 player. Southside's whole backfield, like I could have put them all on the honorable mentions list because they averaged over 9 yards per carry. The top two backs, Ryan Navarra and the slot back AC Corfield, they run that wishbone triple option kind of offense. They both ran for over 1,000 yards. Brody Almashi, the quarterback, had well over 1,000 yards between passing and rushing, and everything he was able to do this year for Southside. And Southside was an excellent team, definitely deserved that number one seed that they got in the playoffs, and fell in a tight championship game to Fort Cherry. It was 42-28, but really, I mean, Fort Cherry winning that game was predicated on them hitting a couple big plays, a big touchdown pass right before halftime that was like a 50-yarder. Yeah, Brody Almashi threw for 1,100 yards and ran for over 700. So yeah, just an outstanding season for those Southside kids. The games of the year, the two games where Fort Cherry played Bishop Canavan, will go down as the best two games this year. The absolute shootout they had at Dormont Stadium in Week 5, and then the rematch game in the semifinals, which was pretty close into the fourth quarter until Fort Cherry scored a couple late touchdowns to pull away. So overall, congratulations to the Rangers. The Matt Seg show was just outstanding this year. Southside reaching the WPIAL title game, winning their first conference title since 1999. And this was an absolutely loaded 1A field. We talked all year about how this was the deepest I think I've ever seen 1A, that there were, 9 teams that I felt like were capable of making a deep run in the playoffs. And obviously, one of them, Cornell, got knocked out in the first round of the playoffs by Rochester, who was another one. And then, a couple of them had to get knocked out in the quarterfinals just because as you progress through the bracket, teams have to lose. And ultimately, it was Fort Cherry to bring it all home. But just an overall great year in 1A. And it was really cool to see Jeanette work themselves back into contention after they were pretty down and out a couple years ago. So congratulations to Jeanette for getting back into the mix as well.
Yeah, and you just look at your rankings there, the WPIAL dominating the the number of teams that are top ranked in but District 4 as well. And funny that obviously Steel High out of District 3 is the one that comes away with the championship there. But
yeah, and I think this is something that my rankings did pretty well, because if you look at like the gap in the rating number between Steel High and everybody else, like they were pretty head and shoulders above everybody, and it played out on the field, right? So it kind of plays out in the mathematical rankings too, that some of those other teams are kind of grouped closer together there, whereas Steel High is head and shoulders.
Steel High doesn't play any 1A team during the regular season. I mean, all of the WPIAL teams are playing 1A teams during the regular season. Steel High did not. It's kind of like the weighted donut on a bat. Okay, like you get there and you swing that weighted bat, which is like Steel High's regular season. They're playing up against 3A, 4A, 5A teams, and then the postseason, then okay, they take the donut off, and then wow, this bat's pretty light when they're out there swinging it up against like 1A teams. So it's all relative, but still, and I think that this is another situation where wild card teams could be a huge benefit to the WPIAL, because you have such a high concentration of good teams, and yet you only take one representative. I mean, I think that's the case in 1A, 2A, and 4A especially. So
yeah. All right. So speaking of Matt Seg and just what he's done through his sophomore year, he was just the third WPIAL player to surpass 4,000 rushing yards in his career as a sophomore.
wow.
And he actually has the most. So Russell Shell, who is, I believe, I know he's the WPIAL leader. I'm pretty sure he's still the state leader in career rushing yards at over 9,000. I think he's the only player statewide to ever break 9,000 career yards. So he was the leader through his sophomore season. And then Mike Vernillo, interestingly enough, also from Fort Cherry, had also had over 4,000 yards through his sophomore year. And Mike Vernillo had been the WPIAL's all-time rushing leader before Russell Shell came along a decade later. But Matt Seg, now a decade following, has surpassed both of those guys. And he's a quarterback. Like, he's a quarterback and is now the WPIAL's rushing leader through, two 2 years of his high
He's
school career.
he's on pace to be the all-time rushing leader as a quarterback through his sophomore year.
Yeah, statewide, because I'm pretty sure Russell Shell is the statewide leader still. So,
Wow.
yeah, that's just amazing. So, our WPIAL Blitz Awards, our team of the year is the Aliquip Equips, who everything and all the accolades that I said earlier in the show still apply. Obviously, what an amazing season for Aliquippa, undefeated champs, 20th WPIAL title in school history, 5th state title in school history, the first time an Aliquippa team has gone undefeated through the state championship game. Just an incredible year for Aliquippa. So much for them to be proud of as a team, a school, a community, a city, with the opening of the new stadium and everything else. So congratulations to them. And our player of the year is Matt Seg from Fort Cherry, because of what he's done and the pace he's on now through his sophomore year as a quarterback to put up that many rushing yards. But he's also doing it through the air. I mean, with over 1,600 passing yards and 20 touchdowns. He scored 63 total touchdowns this year between passing, rushing, punt returns, interception returns. Just an amazing year for Matt Seg. So
Incredible.
congratulations to everyone. And also congratulations, Peters Township and Fort Cherry, on winning their first WPIAL titles in school history. That's an amazing accomplishment for those schools too.
Yes, it absolutely is.
All right, so statewide, Southern Columbia won their 14th state title. St. Joe's Prep won their 8th. Aliquippa and Steel High got their 5th. And then Imhotep and Bell Vernon got their 2nd. Oh, typo on this slide. First typo we've had tonight.
Oh,
yeah, that I left Steel High on the 4 line and also put them on the 5 line. So you can just ignore them on the 4 line because
okay.
they did win their 5th. But the WPIAL has still won the most state titles of any district at 58. District 12 creeping up there on District 4 in 2nd place. Although District 12 has been in the PIAA for a much shorter time. They've just joined in 2008, so relatively recently compared to District 4. And interestingly, we had 4 different districts win titles this year. The WPIAL got 2, District 12 got 2, District 4 and District 3 each got 1. And a pretty wide swath of representation in the state title games as well. But like we talked about at the beginning of the year, at the beginning of the show, it was kind of the usual suspects this year. The teams that had been there, done that, were there and did it again. And congratulations to them for pulling it off. That's not to take anything away from them. It was just, the historically good teams were once again good this year. And that's just how the 2023 season played out.
Well, I think too, it's the second year of the rotation as well. I think that the teams that were good in the classification and in their districts last year were good again this year. And I think that once it all shakes out, I think that trend's going to continue. I think that obviously things will shake out and you'll get kind of a new group by classification come in, but then expect that it's going to continue on into the following year there too. It just seems that that's the trend, that once we go through that 2-year rotation and the way that then the PIAA has all the brackets set up, it just typically is the usual suspects that second year of the rotation.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Yeah. And speaking of which, so obviously congratulations to all the state champions, but speaking of which, I do have some slides here on what's coming next. So let's talk about the success formula first, which is something that we keep an eye on through the cycles. And so the teams in dark yellow are the teams that could get forced up if they have enough transfers. We obviously know that Bell Vernon will be moving up into 4A because their enrollment went up. But the other ones could potentially get forced up through the success formula process. I think I read that Bishop McDevitt is going to be in 5A next year because they did have transfers and they're now playing in the bigger conference.
Yep, I mean that's the word that I was given, that they're going to be a 5A team playing in the Mid-Penn Commonwealth. So they're going to be playing up against the likes of Cumberland Valley and Central Dauphin and State College and Altoona. I mean, That's a regular season schedule. Wow, that's just, that's huge.
Yeah, yeah, that's
That's
gonna be
quite a
some tough
step up.
opponents. It is. It is. Yep.
Harrisburg, it brings
Yeah.
that rivalry back in.
Yeah,
Harrisburg
that's
and Bishop McDevitt every year.
yeah, they used to play, right? All the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Preseason, they were never in the same leagues, but now they are, and yeah, they actually. It's funny. I do recall when McDevitt was playing. There were a couple years that they were playing in 4A. When in the four classifications, Governor Mifflin did play Bishop McDevitt in the 4A playoffs. In fact, they beat them one year. And that I remember that game very vividly. But McDevitt decided to play up from 3A, and it was difficult for them playing against the big boys. I think it's going to be tough for them next year as well. I mean, they're not really used to playing an entire schedule that way because there are 10 teams in the Mid-Penn Commonwealth. So there's 9 regular season games they're going to be playing against those guys. So interesting to see who they'll play out of conference, but yeah, that's going to be quite telling on Bishop McDevitt next year.
Yeah, and potentially depending on transfer, Steel High could have to move up to 2A. YO Northwestern Lehigh could have to move up to 3A. And it depends. The transfers aren't public numbers, so those are things we don't know. These are just what we do know. But from what I read, Aliquippa, Southern Columbia, and Westinghouse did not have enough transfers to trigger moving up, so they will stay in their respective classifications for next year. Also, since I mentioned this, some other teams that were kind of in the process. Bishop Guilfoyle had been forced up into 2A the last cycle. They could potentially move back down to 1A if they didn't have any transfers. I think Farrell has to stay in 2A because of the success that they had. Erie Cathedral Prep was forced up into 5A, and they had enough points to stay in 5A. So that enough points over here on this chart, which I took from the PIAA's website, that's this: if you had 3, 4, or 5 points and have the success factor regardless of transfers, you stay in the same higher classification. So that's kind of where Farrell and Cathedral Prep are. Central Valley had 2 success points, so they could potentially move down if they didn't have enough transfers. And that's sort of the middle tier here on the chart, where if you had 1 or 2 points and transfers, then you have to stay in the higher classifications. But if you didn't have the transfers, then you could go down. So
wow,
Central Valley potentially could move down if they don't have the transfers, but that's a number that we don't know. I think the other big one to keep an eye on is Archbishop Wood, who really struggled this year in the Philadelphia Catholic League, but had been a pretty dominant force for a little while there. They were forced up from 5A to 6A in 2020 due to success points. They were allowed to move down to 5A this past cycle because they didn't accumulate any success points in 6A. But they also didn't accumulate any success points this cycle, which means they can play their enrollment number next year, which is
4A,
3A.
3A. Oh my
3A.
gosh!
So Archbishop Wood, in theory, could move all the way down to 3A if they wanted to. I'm not sure if they will, but that's kind of where their enrollment number landed them. So that's another potential one.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting of what's happening. That a completely new dynamic in District 12 going into this next cycle. I mean, it is. It's going to be crazy if Imhotep moves up, and then they're playing like St. Joe Prep, and so Roman is there, still at 5A, and LaSalle's up at 6A. The one kind of left out in the lurch is LaSalle College because they're 6A and have the likes of Imhotep and St. Joe Prep. But wow, that's really something. Wood goes down to 3A. They're going to be playing the likes of Goretti and Bonner, and that, boy, that could be interesting.
Potentially, because they could always opt to play up a little bit
Yeah,
too. But
correct. They could.
the
I
enrollment.
gotta believe Wood will not, but we'll find out.
Mm-hmm. And just full disclosure, I didn't stick the slides in this show because it's in last week's show. But if people are interested in how the change in enrollment counting
Uh-huh.
between students who go to charter schools and VOTEC schools
Well,
affected
it's
public
all out there
schools.
on demand. They can check it out,
Yeah,
right?
go back to last week's show, check out the end of the show where I talked about how public schools and private schools were impacted by that. I'll leave it at that. Go watch last
Okay.
week's show.
All right. Yeah.
All right, so some other realignment notes. I think a big one for the WPIAL is, this past cycle, we only had 5 teams in 6A. Hempfield and Norwin are both moving
Yeah.
up. So potentially 7 teams. Butler talked about they were playing an independent schedule, sort of a District 10 schedule. So Butler's talked about potentially rejoining. So that would give the WPIAL 8 teams in 6A, which would be a lot better than 5 this past cycle. Even 7 would be a lot better than 5.
Yeah.
Looking at 19 teams in 5A with Armstrong, Kiski, Latrobe all moving up. That potentially could be big because with 18 teams this cycle, we're stuck with the WPIAL champion entering the statewide bracket at the quarterfinal level, which we talked about ad nauseum on the show. 19 teams, does that change the calculus? Do we get to move back to that semifinal slot? We'll see. And 4A and 3A kind of depend on where Central Valley lands with that success formula. But I think the big one here, Bell Vernon obviously moving up to 4A is a big one. But then Knock and West Mifflin, who both made the playoffs this year, are also moving up to 4A. So, another one to keep an eye on. I think 4A, the biggest thing there for the WPIAL to decide is just how they're going to figure out conferences, because the geography does not line up well in 4A to make evenly distributed conferences. So we'll see what they decide there.
Yeah, that is a hard decision when league play is what determines how you're getting in. I mean, how can you split classifications? I don't know.
Yeah,
It doesn't sound like it works out very well.
It doesn't. And you never know. I mean, you could have a situation where the enough teams petition the WPIAL to go to mixed classification conferences and they come up with a power rankings formula. I know someone who's already has a formula that they could borrow if they wanted it. I have
You'd be glad to go and help the WPIAL.
I would consult with them for free just for the honor of doing it. Like it
Great.
would, yeah. So yeah, but I know you're cold out on the deck, so I'll run through this. We've been on for about 2 hours now.
I'm sitting there just enjoying, like, you kind of squirming around on how the heck they're going to do things next year.
It'll be interesting
without
to
a
see.
power ranking formula.
Yeah. I think in 3A, Highlands and North Catholic moving down. The other noteworthy one, Monty Christians decided they have a 1A sized enrollment, but they decided to play all the way up in 3A, which I think is probably reflective of the level of talent. You saw that team play earlier this year.
Oh my God, they look
really
like a
good
5A team out there. My God.
Yeah, so they're going to play up in 3A next year, so that'll be an interesting one to watch. Some quality 3A teams moving down to 2A: Shadyside Academy, Seton LaSalle, South Park. 2 out of those 3 made the playoffs. Seton just missed. Farrell's petitioning to join the WPIAL. Union has opted to play up from 1A to 2A. So 2A is going to be a battle next year. There's going to be some really good teams, especially if Farrell comes in. And then in 1A, Neshannock and Sarah Catholic, who have both been contenders in 2A over the last few years, moving down to 1A to add even more depth there. So it's going to be a interesting realignment cycle. But I think, Neshannock and Sarah are definitely noteworthy contenders now in 1A. Shadyside, Seton, South Park, potentially Farrell in 2A. And Bell Vernon in 4A is another strong contender now. That now you've got, like we had this past cycle, right? When, remember, Aliquippa had won the state championship in 4A, and Central Valley had been 2-time defending champs in 3A. Then the Central Valley moved up, and you had that showdown between Central Valley and Aliquippa, the two defending state
Well,
champions.
yeah,
So,
Bell Vernon moves down then and almost like takes Central Valley's slot as like being 3A state champions.
yep.
You know, it's like who's going to move up and down is what's going to determine who is or isn't a state champion. That is just wow, man, that's talking about the luck of the draw. Holy cow.
And 3A is the one level where the WPIAL has absolutely dominated. The WPIAL has won 7 of the 8 3A state titles since we went to the 6 classification era. And the only year they lost was when Wyoming area came back from 14-0 down in the second half to beat Central Valley. So it's been a very good run of WPIAL teams in 3A, and with Bell Vernon moving up, it'll be interesting to see. Does Avonworth fill the void? Does Elizabeth Forward fill the void? Does North Catholic fill the void moving down? Does Amani Christian fill the void playing up, or does Central Valley able to play in 3A next year and just return to the dominant form that they were? So it's going to be fascinating to see how this all plays out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that concludes our show for this year. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Congratulations once again to the 6 state champions. The Western Pennsylvania cohort was very well represented in Mechanicsburg this year. Thanks to GoMVB for sponsoring the show, the SSP Network for hosting us on YouTube, Steel City Blitz for having all my articles there. You can check out more Steelers coverage there. You can check out, I'll have some WPIAL stuff in the off season as we go through realignment and the new conferences are announced and all that. So it's going to be an exciting off season, and we'll see where things go next year. It's been a really cool year. I'm glad we got to talk with Dan Zangrilli again from KDKA Radio. Those guys do a great job of everything that they've done throughout the years, and also everything they did putting on the statewide broadcast for the state championship games. And I'm lucky enough that they asked me to be on the radio once this year, so that was probably the highlight of my year. But it's been a great season of high school football, and thanks everyone for tuning into the show, for supporting the show, for watching, for everything, retweets and interacting on Twitter and Facebook and all that. We really appreciate everyone that's watched and tuned in this year and followed the journey that we've been on.
It has been one heck of a journey. I start I start out on the deck and I finish out on the deck. I mean, that's kind of like my mantra here. But yeah, I can't echo any more than what you said, Ian. In that we really I want to thank everybody who has tuned into the show all year, all the coaches. Oh, look here, you're taking a cue from Coach Humbert there and bringing the family out. But no,
Yeah, we have an awake baby, so we're gonna, yeah.
But I want to thank you, Ian, for obviously all the hard work that you do toward this show. And gosh, it's the end of another year. I mean, and you don't want it to end, but unfortunately everything does come to an end at some time. And we're at the end of the 2023 football season. I want to thank obviously all the fans there. And hey, the rest of the week I'll be putting out those interviews that I have with all the coaches that I've been talking about here on the broadcast. We'll send one out per week. I don't think there's any rush because I have an entire off season to get them out there. But they were all pretty special, as this has been a very special year for me personally too, covering high school football. So for my man Ian McMeans, I'm Bruce Badgley. Hey, listen, thanks for joining us here on the WPIAL Blitz Show this year. We'll see you in 2024, fans. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Have a great holiday.